I sat in the chair between the table and the window. My dad watched from his usual seat on the end to my right. It's the you can see everything spot. The recruiter hovered to my left, pointing at a line on a document sitting on top of a folder. My mom? She lovingly glared from the other side of the table. At that moment, our tiny kitchen felt a lot tinier. "Are you sure this is what you want?" my mom asked. I wasn't. I had doubts. But also I was. For many reasons. Mostly because my parents couldn't afford to put me through college. But also, I needed change. To get out of the small podunk town where I had lived almost all my life. And in my young and naive opinion, the military was the vehicle to make that happen. I nodded, turned, leaned over the crisp sheet, and with a few scribbles, gave it 4 years of my life. That day, I joined the U.S. Army. I was only 17. I won't say how long ago that was, but I was still a high school senior. And I didn't know it then, but that would be the first big decision of my life. It was scary. Oh boy, it was scary. But it might have been the best decision ever. I have a confession. I started writing this first podcast episode 8 weeks ago, and then it was actually going to be a newsletter. But I digress. So why did it take so long? The startup company I worked for was going through a pivot. And I thought, what a great topic. Pivoting is a universal event for many startups, so it seemed fitting as a subject for the first article. But did you notice the tense I used? That's right, I said worked. But I'll get to that later. To answer the question, why did it take me so long to publish? It turns out that pivoting at a startup is hard work. It takes a lot of time. New marketing assets have to be created for new products and services for an all-new audience. I worked extra hours and weekends, and when I wasn't working, I didn't want to be near my computer. Then, in the middle of this pivot, I got COVID. It's taken weeks for me to recover. I'm still recovering, to be honest. Thankfully, my symptoms were mild. It was mostly fatigue, but there was lots of fatigue. Speaking of fatigues, attention! Left, face, forward, march. The recruiter, a staff sergeant I think, barked orders at us. We were a group of U.S. Army recruits with a split training option. That means we're a bunch of 17-year-olds who signed up too early to ship out, but had time to learn some basics before we did. We gathered on Texas Tech University's green across the street from the recruiting office. At least the weather was usually nice and sunny, and not too warm. Most of the marching commands were easy enough to learn, but one in particular was tricky. That one was, "To the rear, march." We had to execute this command, obviously, while we were marching. Some of us didn't pivot on time, some of us too early, and some of us not at all. I can't remember how many times we bumped heads, literally, but boy, did we mess that one up a bunch. Of course, our first executions were messy and sometimes painful, but with practice, we only got better. Here's how it's supposed to go. First, the to the rear march command is given as the heel of the right foot strikes the ground. More specifically, the order is timed so that the word march occurs with the right heel strike. Next, you take a 12-inch step forward with your left foot and align it with your right. For reference, regular steps are about 30 inches. So for this maneuver, it's like a half step. Then, as you distribute your body weight on the balls of your feet, you pivot, turning 180 degrees to the right, and take another 12-inch step with the left foot. Finally, you take a whole step with the right foot, continuing to march forward in the new direction. Some tips for pivoting. Don't force your body up or lean forward. Remember, the pivot takes a full count. And while pivoting, your arms stick to your sides as if you're in the position of attention. You only start swinging them again after you continue to march. This is one of those things that's actually easier done than said, because once you get it, it takes very little thought. And when you reach this point of proficiency, you only need to listen for the command and you'll execute it without a problem. The company I worked for is just about done executing its pivot. As part of its pivot, we have parted ways. I helped find and hire a new writer who could better communicate about the latest products and services with the new audience. Overall, the company is facing and marching in the right direction, and they're going to do great. As for me, I'm undergoing a pivot of my own. I'm considering going freelance full-time. I've dabbled in freelance over the past few years. Maybe it's time to make it more than a dabble. Did it suck to leave the company? Yes. Is it scary to consider this big change? Absolutely. But that's the thing about a real-life pivot. It's rarely the perfect time for one. All you can do is listen for the call and execute on command as best as possible. Yes, pivots are scary AF. They have the potential to create something great. You just have to see it through. I'm your host and guide, Antonio Banda. Thank you for listening to the first episode of Growth Expeditions Unknown, a podcast where I explore life and work as a content marketer and creator. If you enjoy contemplating life and reflecting on the world around you, consider subscribing to join us on this journey. See you on the next expedition.